through your answers. So I'm planning to check it by myself, all the answers you did, and I will take a separate class to discuss those questions, right? So we have actually very few topics to discuss, few in the sense we have. So I think we have plenty of time. We will have plenty of time to discuss questions, right? So once we finish our theory, we will be discussing, I'm planning to discuss enough questions, and before that I will take a separate class to discuss the answers of the first semester assignment, right? So hope you have the lecture note. Actually, I yesterday I didn't send you any lecture note because we have a remaining part to discuss with our previous lecture note, right? So we were discussing about the Shramanic tradition. Hope you can remember. And we discussed about the Shramanic characteristics, and we finished that part, and we came into the topic of the 6 Shramanic traditions, right? So under that topic, first we finished discussing about the Ajivakas, right? So we finished discussing about the Ajivakas, right? So and we this is a very brief explanation, very basic points, right? So about these 6 traditions, and after that we are planning to, once we get a kind of a brief knowledge about these 6 Shramanic traditions, we will be discussing about those teachers, 6 contemporary teachers in detail within our next lecture onwards, right? So for the time being, as we discussed about the Shramanic tradition characteristics and all, before we are moving into the detailed explanation, we will be discussing about the from today about the a very brief introduction to those 6 doctrines and their teachers, right? So within that topic, we started discussing about the Ajivakas, right? So when we talk about the Ajivakas, they believed in fatalism and predeterminism. Hope you can remember. Makkali Putta Gosala was the teacher of the doctrine, right? So we discussed about that. And the second tradition, Shramanic tradition that we are going to talk about tonight is the Lokayatas, right? So we will be discussing, we will discuss all the 6 traditions tonight very briefly, in order to get a kind of idea about those teachers as well as the doctrines, the main theories or main concepts about those 6 religions, right? So the first one was the Ajivakas. We did that. So the teacher was the Makariputta Gosala, and the main concepts of the Ajivakas, if we take very briefly, they believed in fatalism and predeterminism, right? Predeterminism, right? So the second one that we are going to talk about today is Lokayatas, right? Lokayatas, right? So the Lokayatas is a tradition which talks about the materialistic tradition, right? So it is a kind of a tradition which is more into the materialism, right? So the according to the scholars and philosophers who were there within the India, they believed that there were possibly several, more than one materialistic traditions have been prevailed during the 6th and 7th centuries BCE, but we don't have enough information to learn about those specific traditions. Well, actually, we have lost their specific names. Rather, we have Lokayatas, the Charvakas. Charvakas is a subdivision that we could identify within the materialistic tradition, right? So Lokayatas is a materialistic tradition, and if we talk about the main concept with the about the Lokayatas, the followers of the Lokayatas, they accept the finality of this world, and worldly life, right? So they believe that this is the final world, this is the final birth, and this birth and this world as the final world and birth, right? So, and they reject all the notions after the all the notions of the afterlife, right? So they believe this as the final life and final world. There is no more other worlds than this. This is the final birth, and this is the final world that they are going to live, right? So that is their main belief, and they rejected all the notions, everything about the any other stories about the afterlife. They rejected, and they did not believe anything about the afterlife, Lokayatas, right? So that is the main concept about the Lokayatas. If we take about the teacher of the Lokayata, Ajita Kesa Kambali. Ajita Kesa Kambali was the teacher of the teacher, or the one of the great proponent of the Lokayatas, right? So he gained kind of a very popularity and many followers at that time, according to the Buddhist texts. And so Lokayatas, as I indicated earlier, Lokayatas is a materialistic tradition, and also another concept that we could find within the Lokayatas is they accept only the finality of the world, right? They believe only about this world and this world, right? So they reject all the notions of the afterlife, right? So the Ajita Kesa, as I indicated earlier, Ajita Kesa Kambali was the teacher of the, or the proponent of the Lokayatas, right? So even though it is mentioned as the, it is indicated as the Ajita Kesa Kambali, and their followers are materialists, but they have, it is questionable in sometimes, they have led a very austere life, and they gave up all the material comforts. They had gave up all the material comforts, and they wore clothes which were made up with human hair, which were made up with, according to the Buddhist texts, which were made up with human hair, and they led a very strict austere life with self-denial and renunciation, Ajit Kesa Kambali and his followers, right? So according to Buddhist texts, right? So according to Buddhist texts, Ajit Kesa Kambali, he opposed sacrifices and ritual worship. He had opposed sacrifices and ritual worship, and also he disputed the karma doctrine. He disputed the karma doctrine, and they believed that death itself as the final liberation. Death as the final liberation. So that is why they considered this as the final world, this as the final birth, right? So due to that fact, they considered the death as the final liberation from this mortal life, and further they disputed, they questioned about the karma doctrine, and also they opposed to sacrifices and ritual worship. They were opposed to the sacrifices and ritual worship, right? So that is Lokayatas, right? So that is the main tradition, right? So within the Lokayatas, as I indicated earlier, as I told you earlier, the scholars and philosophers within the India, they believe that there were more materialistic traditions have been prevailed, but we have lost their specific names, right? So among them, Charvaka is one specific tradition under the Lokayatas that we could find, right? So the Charvaka, the name was given for the Charvaka. It is a specific doctrine, right? So under the Lokayatas, where it is a materialistic tradition, right? So the Charvaka, the name was given as the Charvaka due to the founder's name. The founder was the Charvaka, so that is why it was named as Charvakas, right? So also it is falls under the category of Lokayatas, right? So the Lokayata, so likewise, like the Lokayatas, the Charvakas also, they denied the existence of external soul and God. They denied the external soul and God. So the Lokayatas, they denied the ritual worship and sacrifices, right? So same as the Charvakas, they rejected the external existence of external soul and God, right? So then what they accepted, right? So let's see what they accepted. Charvakas, they accepted wealth. they accepted wealth and enjoyment, right? Karma. Simply we could say as karma, they accepted the followers of the Charvaka and his followers, they accepted wealth and enjoyment as the chief aims of the life, chief arms of the life, right? So they accepted wealth and enjoyment, right? So they believe that this world is the final, and there are no more worlds that are other than this, and there are no more lives other than this, right? So due to that facts, they were given the name Lokaya. They were categorized under the term Lokayatas, right? So they too, same as the Lokayatas, they too believe that this world as the final world and this as the final birth, right? So they did not believe in soul, they did not believe in salvation, they did not believe in afterlife as the Lokayatas, right? So what they believed only about this specific life. They believe that there are no other lives other than this, there are no other worlds other than this, right? So that is how they believed, and they saw the death as the final liberation. They saw the death as the final liberation, right? So the according to the Charvakas, their highest purpose of the life, the satisfaction of the life is the uninhibited enjoyment, right? So they wanted to enjoy their lives as they believed this as the final birth, right? So they wanted to have uninhibited enjoyment within this specific life, right? So as they treated this life, this world as the final world and life, right? So the and Olokayatas, the follower, the Charvakas, Ajit Kesakambali, and their followers, they rejected all the means of knowledge except the direct perception, except the direct perception. So according to what they believed, what they ask the question, what the Lokayatas believed, they only believed in the uh, senses that could grasp, senses that could grasp. They rejected all the senses that could not grasp. They rejected all the senses or knowledge or whatever that could not grasp, and anything that could not grasp, they identified those as untrue or non-existent. They identified anything that could not grasp, any sense, any knowledge that could not grasp as untrue or non-existent, right? So that is about the Lokayatas. Lokayatas is a materialistic tradition, right? So there were more traditions under this, but we have lost their specific names, right? So they within this tradition, the teacher or the proponent of the specific tradition was the Ajit Kesakambali, and he and his followers believed this world as the final, this birth as the final, and they rejected all the notions after the notions of afterlife, right? So when we talk about, if we talk more about the Ajit Kesakambali, he opposed to the sacrifices and ritual worships, and also he disputed the karma doctrine, and they both the Ajit Kesakambali and his followers, and the Charvakas and his followers, they considered death as the final liberation, because their main concept was the finality of the world. They considered this world as the final, this birth as the final birth. So due to that fact, they both these two, the Lokayatas and the subcategory of Charvakas, they considered the death as the final liberation of the life, right? So if you take Charvakas, the founder was Charvaka. The name was given because of the founder's name, right? So they were pure ascetics, and they wanted if you take their highest purpose was to gain the uninhibited enjoyment. They accepted wealth and enjoyment because they treated this world as the final. Thus, they wanted to gain uninhibited enjoyment within this specific life, right? So they only they treated anything that they could identify as knowledge was only the on anything or an only thing that they could grasp, right? So any knowledge or any sense only that they could grasp was identified as the knowledge, right? So anything that could not grasp or anything that could not perceive were for them untrue or non-existent, right? Were untrue or non-existent for them, right? So that is about the Lokayatas, right? So the Lokayatas, the teacher was the Ajit Kesakambali, and under the Lokayatas we could find a subcategory or another division called Charvakas. The teacher was the Charvaka, that is why his name was given. And both of these traditions were materialistic traditions, and they talk about the finality of the world, and they consider this world as the final, this birth as the final, no other birth, no other world other than this, right? So, and also they consider death itself as the final liberation of the mortal life, right? So that is about the Lokayatas, right? So far we discussed about the, during our last lecture, we discussed about the Ajivakas, and now we discussed about the Lokayatas, right? So the third group is the Sasvatavadins, right? So Sasvatavadins, if you take the basic concept of the Sasvatavadins, we could simply say they were externalists. They were externalists, right? So why do we call them as externalists, right? So they believed, so Sasvatavadins, they believed in external existence of 7 basic elements, right? So that is their main belief, right? So the external existence of 7 basic elements: earth, water, fire, air, joy, sorrow, and life, right? So they believed in those uh, external existence of these 7 basic elements, right? So the earth, water, fire, air, joy, sorrow, and life. They believed in these 7 external existence of these basic elements, right? So if we talk about this Shramanic tradition, the teacher or the founder or the prominent leader of this Shramanic tradition was Pakuda Kachayana. Pakuda Kachayana was the teacher or the prominent leader of this Shramanic tradition, right? So it is according to the Buddhist texts and the Buddhist texts and other literature available. He was believed to be a contemporary to the Buddha and Mahavira. He was a contemporary teacher to the Buddha and Mahavira. So who we identified? Who is the Mahavira? Mahavira was the teacher of the Jainism. Mahavira was the teacher of the Jainism, right? So there was a sutta called Samannapala Sutta. Within the Buddhist texts, we could find a sutta called Samannapala Sutta. Within this specific sutta, we could identify many and many more information about these 6 contemporary teachers. This specific sutta provide more information about these 6 contemporary teachers to the Buddha, right? So what do they believe? So if we take the Pakuda Kachayana, and they believed in 7 external elements, right? So they believed that the Pakuda Kachayana, he and his followers believed that anything, whatever, or any being or anything which is within this world arose as a result of the combination of these above 7 elements. By combining those 7 elements, any being, anything is arising, right? So that is how they believed, right? So further they believed that the beings within the world experiencing their life, birth, pain, pleasure, sorrow, whatever, due to the aggregation or segregation of these 7 elements. right? So aggregation and segregation of these 7 elements, the beings experience life, death, pain, pleasure, sorrow, and everything due to these due to the aggregation and segregation of these 7 elements. So what are the 7 elements? Can you remember? Can you tell what are those 7 elements?
Water, us, water, fire,
Yeah, fire,
air,
joy,
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 sorrow,
sorrow, and life.
life.
Right. So the Pakuda Kachayana and his followers believed that each and every being or whatever within this world was arose as a result of the combination of these 7 elements, right? And also throughout our life, right? So throughout the lives, as human beings or animals or whatever, we and animals experience um, several positions, or like life, death, sorrow, happiness, everything, joy. So they believe that they experience those positions due to the aggregation and segregation of those 7 elements, right? So that is why they were treated as externalists, because they were believed in those 7 external elements. They were believed in those 7 external elements, right? So those were Saswata Vadins. The teacher was the Pakuta Kachayana, right? So within our next lectures, this is just an introduction to those 6 teachers and the 6 doctrines, right? So in our next lectures, we will be discussing in detail about these contemporary teachers and their doctrines, right? So this is just an introduction for you, right? As we were discussing about the Shramanic tradition, under the Shramanic tradition, I wanted to give you a quick introduction to those contemporary teachers and their religion. So that is why I have given like a summary to their religious concepts and their teachers. And from next week onwards, we will be discussing about these teachers and their doctrines in detail, right? In detail, right? So so far we discussed about the Ajivakas, Lokayatas, and Saswata Vadins, right? So Saswata Vadins, they were externals. They believed in external factors, 7 external factors: earth, water, fire, joy, sorrow, life, and air. Right, so they believe that everything or every human being or whatever within this world is arose as a result of the aggregation and segregation of these 7 elements, right? So, and also further, the Pakuda Kachayana believed that, as he was the founder of this religion, he further said that anything that we experience within this life, sorrow, joy, pleasure, birth, death, is due to this aggregation and aggregation of these 7 basic elements, right? Right. So the next group is the Ahetuvadins. The next group is the Ahetuvadins, right? So this is another Shramanic tradition which prevailed within India during the 6th and 7th century, specifically 6th century BCE, right? So the Ahetuvadins, they basically believed in a moral and purposeless nature of the soul, right? So Ahetuvadins, they believed in a moral and purposeless nature of the soul. This is interesting, right? So they believe that Ahetuvadins believe that actions would produce no fruit, no karma. Any action, whatever the action we do, they would produce no karma. Right? They would produce no karma. Now, according to Buddhism, we believe whatever the good, if we do good deeds, it would result in good karma, right? So if we did do bad, then it will result in bad, right? So what Ahetuvadins thought and they believed that whatever we do, moral, immoral, sinful, virtuous, pious, any action, they would produce no consequences. They would produce no karma for the soul, right? So they identified the soul and the body as two distinct things, right? Soul and body as two separate things, right? So whatever the action body does would not, if for example, if our body does any bad thing, it would not harm the soul, right? It would not harm the soul. They consider the soul as a separate, entirely separate, two distinct things, right? So the soul and body are two different things, two separate things. So whatever the body does, it does not harm the soul. Whatever bad action, if we, even according to the Hetuvadins, if a person, if we, according to us, if we take a person, we have to consider both the soul as the body, right? So Ahetuvadins, they considered body and soul as two different things. If a body kill another person, it would not harm the soul, because soul, they considered soul as a separate thing, right? So they considered soul as the very distinct thing, and it did not participate in any action. Soul did not do not participate in any action, right? So according to the Buddhist text, Samannapala Sutta, before that, the Ahetuvadins, the teacher or the founder of the Ahetuvadins is Purna Kassapa. The teacher of this doctrine was Purna Kassapa, right? So according to Buddhist texts, Samannapala Sutta, it has a quote which is accepted from the Purna Kassapa statement. It says that if a person directly or indirectly engaged in immoral, unethical, and criminal actions such as killing, torturing, stealing, or whatever, no evil would occur to him, right? So whatever bad thing due by the body, nothing would come to him, because they treated the soul as a separate thing. Whatever the action done by the body, it would not bring a consequences to the soul, because they treated soul as a separate thing, right? Right. So the same thing happens in the case of the good deeds as well. Whatever the good things which is done by the body would not bring any consequences or any good deeds to the soul, right? Because they considered the body and soul as the two distinct things, two separate things, right? So in both the cases, whatever we do, good or bad, the soul remained untouched. And pure, since it did not cause the any action, right? So whatever we do, whatever bad we do, whatever the good we do, it did not touch the soul. The body is the only thing which is participated to do any good or bad. Rather, soul remain untouched separately, right? So that is how they believed. That is what we identified as the term ahetu. That is what they termed it as ahetu, where the soul remain untouched, right? So, but even though from the social and ethical perspective, this is very questionable, because according to the Purna Kassapa's religion, it condones the criminality and evil actions, right? It condones this criminality. It has condoned. So according to the Purna Kassapa, they have accepted any criminal actions, right? They have accepted, they have condoned the any criminal and evil action. So it is very questionable, and it is very problematic when it comes to the society, right? Because they according to this religion, it was okay to do any criminal activity, any evil deed, right? So due to that fact, it is very questionable, and it was very problematic. And also within the tradition of the Purnakassapa, within the Ahetuvadins, they held similar belief. Now they accepted any evil action as they believed that the soul do not participate with that, right? So similarly, they held a belief to the suicide as well. According to the Ahetuvadins, they permitted its members to suicide themselves whenever they wanted to gain the liberation. Right? So they allowed their members, they gave their members the permission to suicide themselves whenever they wanted to, as a means of to get the liberation. So this religion, this doctrine is does not match with the social and ethical beliefs and laws accordingly, because it allowed and it accept all the evil and criminal actions, as well as it allowed their members to suicide themselves whenever they wanted to gain the liberation, right? So that is about the Ahetuvadins, right? So who was the teacher of the Ahetuvadins? Purnakassapa was the teacher or the proponent of the Ahetuvadins, right? So they believed that the body and soul as two distinct things, two separate things, right? So whatever the action done by the body does not harm the soul. Whatever done by the body, the soul remain untouched, right? So that is how they believed, right? And the fifth tradition, the Shramanic tradition group was the Ajnanis, right? So they, when we talk about the Ajnanis, they believed in absolute universal indeterminism. They believed in indeterminism, absolute universal indeterminism, and they believed that nothing was certain and nothing was firmly established. They believed that nothing was certain and nothing was firmly established, right? So the Sanjaya Belatthiputta was the leader or the proponent of the Ajnanis. Sanjaya Belatthiputta, he was a contemporary teacher to the Buddha. He was also a contemporary to the Buddha, right? So according to him, so as we discussed earlier, they believed in absolute universal determinism, indeterminism. They believed that nothing was certain and nothing was firmly established, right? So according to Ajnanis, even though they were identified as Ajnanis, they were a group of intelligent people, because they, according to them, Ajnanis, they believed that there are no absolute or universal truths. Sanjaya Belatthiputta and his followers believed that there are no absolute or universal truths. They believed that there are no absolute or universal truths, and they believe that knowledge is a mixture of relative and opposing truths, right? So they identified and considered the knowledge as a mixture of relative and opposing truths, and using this analogy, they challenged all the metaphysical notion. Using this analogy, they challenged all the metaphysical notions. For simply, Ajnanis, they believed in absolute universal indeterminism, right? So they, according to them, nothing was certain and firmly established. Teacher was the Sanjaya Belatthiputta. They believed that there are no absolute or universal truths. If you take the knowledge, according to them, was a mixture of relative and opposing truths. And using these analogies, they challenged all the metaphysical notions, right? So we will be discussing about each and every group in detail, right? So it is a very brief introduction to the Ajnanis, and finally the Jainism and Buddhism, right? So among all these traditions, among all these six traditions, six Shramanic traditions, Buddhism and Jainism are the only traditions which survived until to the present, which survived. Buddhism and Jainism were the traditions which were survived until to the present time, right? So they, if you take the Buddhism and Jainism, they have two distinct approaches to life and liberation. They have two distinct Buddhism. They have two separate, two different, distinct approaches to life and liberation, right? So the Jainism, Mahavira was the proponent, or actually he was not the founder, but he was one of the major teacher to the Jainism, right? So within the Jainism, they talk about the eternal souls, eternal nature of the life, and within the Jainism, they practice extreme austerities. Within the Jainism, they practice extreme austerities and penances, and those extreme austerities and penances include self-mortification to, for example, it includes self-mortification to achieve the liberation, right? So Jainism, uh, Mahavira was one of the proponent teacher with the or famous teacher within the Jainism. So Jainism believed in eternal souls and eternal nature of the life. So if we take their practices of austerity, they have very strict, extreme austerities and penances, such as self-mortification in order to achieve the liberation, right? So if you take the Buddhism, the Gautama Buddha was the founder and the teacher of this doctrine, right? So Buddhism believed in impermanence of life, non-existence of soul, and etc. We will be discussing them in detail, right? So and if you take the royal path, their final liberation, if you take the highest satisfaction within the religion is to nirvana, right? So for that, in order to gain nirvana, if you take the royal path, is known as the middle path, right? So it is known as the middle path, right? So both the Jainism and Buddhism, these are as we learned earlier, these two are the only traditions which remain up to date, right? So both the traditions, Buddhism and Jainism, gained immense popularity in ancient India. Both the traditions gained immense popularity, attraction of the people in the ancient India, and for even now, and Jainism was expanded in India with limited followers, while the Buddhism expanded its boundaries and it has expanded to all over the world now, right? So that is the present situation to the Buddhism, right? So Jainism is also actually confined or expanded within India, but whereas if you take the Buddhism has expanded beyond the boundaries, and it has expanded in many other countries within the world today, right? So those are the introduction to six main traditions, or the Shramanic traditions, contemporary Shramanic traditions to the Buddhism, right? So the Ajivakas, Lokayatas, Sasvatavadins, Ahetuvadis, Anjanis, and Jainism, right? So, and I sent you a separate paper which includes the our syllabus yesterday, right? So within that syllabus, if you have that paper with you, I wanted to illustrate you that how far we have done up to now, right? So we have covered all first, second, and third topics, right? So Indian culture before the advent of Aryans, we have finished that. The second one, evolution of religious, social, and literary aspects of Vedic and Brahmanic culture up to the Upanishadic age, we have completed that. The third one is evolution of Shramanic culture and its characteristics. right? So we completed it we just finished that, right? So, and the fourth one is political, economic, and social conditions during the time of the Buddha. Fifth one, nature of the Brahmanic thought during the time of the Buddha. Sixth one is the teachings of the six religious teachers contemporaries to the Buddha, right? So within the third topic, actually we discussed about we actually summarized about those six contemporary teachers, right? So what I'm going to do is, for it, I think it is more convenient for us. For the time being, I'm going to skip the fourth and fifth topics, the fourth topic and fifth topic, and I'm going to go to the sixth topic from the next week onwards, right? Within the because I think it is more convenient for you, as we have discussed about the basics of those contemporary teachers, right? So due to that fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the 4 and 5, and I will be starting our next lecture from the sixth one, right? Teachings of the religious teachers contemporaries to the Buddha, right? So I will be starting that topic from next week, and once we finish that, once we finalize that topic, let's go to the fourth and fifth topic, right? So I think it is more convenient for you as well as for me, because I'm in the process of preparing my lecture note one by one about those teachers contemporaries, right? So I think it is it okay for you, with you?
Yes, it is okay.
Yes.
Okay, right. So if we so as we have few minutes, right? So if we take a summary what we discussed so far about the six traditions, right? So the first tradition we discussed was Ajivakas. Ajivakas, the teacher was the Makkali
Gosara.
Putta Gosala. The teacher was the Makkali Putta Gosala. And the if we take the main concept was the fatalism and predeterminism. Fatalism and predeterminism, Niyati. We identify it as Niyati. The second group is Lokayatas. Under the Lokayatas, we found another subgroup called Charvakas, right? So if we take the Lokayatas, the teacher was the Ajit Kes Kambali, right? So they talked about the materialism and finality of this world. They treated this world as the final. They treated this birth as the final. No other birth than this, no other world than this. Due to that, they wanted to have for Charvakas, they wanted to have the enjoyment, uninhibited enjoyment within this life, right? So that is about the Lokayatas, materialism and the finality of the world. They rejected all the notions of the afterlife, right? So the third group is the Sasvatavadins. Third group is the Sasvatavadins, where the teacher or the proponent of the Sasvatavadins was Bhaktivedanta Kachayana, right? So they were externalists, right? So basically, externalists, they believed in 7 basic elements: earth, water, fire, air, joy, sorrow, life. Those, they believed in those 7 elements. They believed that due to the aggregation and segregation of those 7 elements, human beings arose, and they experience joy, sorrow, pleasure, or whatever within the life due to the aggregation or segregation of these 7 basic elements, right? So Sasvatavadins. The fourth group was the Ahetuvadins. Ahetuvadins. The Purna Kassapa was the proponent or the teacher to the specific group, right? So the Ahetuvadins, they believed that they treated the soul and body as 2 distinct things, 2 different, 2 separate things, right? So whatever the action produced by the body would not harm, would not touch the soul. Soul remain untouched, whatever the thing done by the body, right? So they were that is how they believed, right? So whatever the practice done by the body would not affect the soul, right? So that is how they believed, and they permitted their followers to suicide themselves whenever they wanted to get the liberation. But this doctrine, the teachings of this doctrine, Ahetuvadins, is bit questionable with the social life, ethical life, right? So the fifth group is the Ajnanis. The Sanjay Bellatiputta was the teacher of the Ajnanis. They talked about the indeterminism. The sixth group is the Jainism, right? Jainism. The Mahavira was one of the teachers. He was not the actually founder. He was one of the great teachers within the Jainism. The Nigantanatha was also another name to identify the Mahavira, right? So they practiced extreme asceticism, right? So eternal nature of life and the soul. They believed in eternal nature of the life and the soul. They practiced extreme asceticism, like self-mortification to gain the liberation, right? So the final group, what we are learning is Buddhism, right? So Buddhism, those are six contemporaries to the Buddha, right? So the Buddhism was the if you take the teacher of the doctrine was Gautama Buddha, impermanence of life, non-existence of soul, and etc. And the royal path to achieve the nirvana was the middle path according to the Buddha, right? So that is a quick summary to the six traditions or six contemporary traditions which we discussed so far, right? So I'm not going to give you any questions tonight, and that is all for today. I think we have around 12 minutes remaining, right? So I will prepare your lecture note, and I'm planning to start from the Makkali Putta Gosala, the teacher of the Ajivakas, right? So we will be discussing about the Ajivakas from next week, right? So as I told you, I will be starting from the sixth main topic of your syllabus, and for the time being, I will skip the fourth and fifth topic, right? So the main topic, and once we finish the teachings of six religious contemporaries, we will be going to touch the 4 and 5, right? So 4 and 5 is where the political, economic, social conditions during the time of Buddha, and the fifth one is the nature of the Brahmanic thoughts, right? So we have very few topics to cover, right? So and next month I'm planning to take a separate class, in the sense the same class Tuesday. We have around 3 to 4 classes per month, right? So I'm planning to take one class to discuss our assignment, right? So I'm planning to discuss questions, right? As we have plenty of time to discuss the syllabus as well as the questions, right? Go through the lecture note. I will send you the next lecture note as soon as possible, right? So if you have any question, then do not hesitate to contact me, right? So that is all for today. I'm not going to give you any question because I have to correct your assignments as well, right? So study well, go through your lecture notes. If you have any question, then email me, right?
Okay.
Then thank you very much for joining with
Thank
me.
you very much.
Hoping to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
See you
very
on next week.
much.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.